pause, we're going to look at our next section for producers, and that is about the non-price factors. So this is combining both internal and external price factors. So again, let me know if you've got any questions, and I'll run through some explanations of this topic. So if we look at our whole table about supply, we can see that on the left it says price. That was what we did in the first section. That will be one question. The next two questions of the exam will be about non-price factors. Where I've got the pink circle, these ones are internal price factors, and they are the costs of production, price of other goods the firm can produce. So let's say I was a farmer and I was producing strawberries and raspberries. Technological developments and productivity increases. On the right hand side, you'll see external non-price factors, and those are environmental, legal, political, trade and cultural. So the next two questions of your exam will include both of those. So you'll probably have a question on internal and a question on external, I'm just assuming. So both of these two arms, they will create a shift of the whole curve. So you'll get given a scenario, and the curve will either increase supply, so you'll shift the curve to the right, or it will decrease supply and you'll shift the curve to the left, and you'll need to explain why. So that's where we're going. Let's look at all the different scenarios. So just as we talked about, the non-price factors are going to cause the whole curve to shift, and it will either go left or it will go right. So as you can see, if we decrease supply, we're going to move to the left, and same as what we do in consumers, we go from S1 to S2. If we were shifting to the right, that would show an increase in supply. And again, we would go from S1 to S2. So you'd only do one of these, you wouldn't have both lines. So change in supply, these are the different causes, and now I've categorized them into things that will cause an increase in supply and a decrease in supply. So now I've combined both internal and external, because it's more important to know what's going to cause an increase and a decrease. If they're internal or external, you'll be able to figure that one out. So let's look at an increase in supply. So costs of production decrease. So if I was a farmer and I was selling strawberries and raspberries, and perhaps let's say, for example, my cost of production decreased because I was able to buy the seeds for cheaper. So overall, my cost to produce these plants have now decreased. Therefore, I'm going to increase my supply. Number two, state of technology improves. So maybe I don't need to do it all by hand now. There's a machine available that I could purchase. That's going to increase my supply. Trade barriers are removed in favor of suppliers. So let's say, for example, that there used to be a restriction and I couldn't send my berries overseas. Now that trade barrier has been removed, so I can now export my berries overseas. That's going to increase my supply. Legal factors, that can be anything, but it could be in regards to costs or production, and then same. So for example, let's say a law was taken away that restricted my growing, that would increase my supply. Productivity increases. Perhaps I find a faster way to pick or grow the berries. That's going to increase my supply. Price of related good decreases. So this is a little bit of a tricky one. So I'm producing strawberries and berries, okay, and let's say we're looking specifically at strawberries. and strawberries were $2 a punnet. And then we look at berries. Let's say they were $5 a punnet. If my strawberries went down in price, I'm making less money from them. My profit is going to decrease. So I'm not making as much profit from my strawberries. So I'm going to increase my supply of other berries because that's going to be more profitable. So that one's a little bit tricky, but just think about your profit. Fewer health and safety costs, that's going to help increase my supply. Less compliance costs, that's also going to increase my supply. Compliance, those are just laws and regulations as well. So now let's look at on the right, what would decrease my supply? So cost of production increases. That could be anything from maybe the workers' rate has gone up, so now I have to pay my workers more. So because my costs has increased, I'm going to decrease my supply. Technology becomes obsolete. So perhaps there was a particular piece of equipment that really helped me grow and farm my berries. If that goes obsolete and I can no longer do that, that's going to decrease my supply. Trade barriers removed. So maybe I can't send my berries overseas now. That's going to decrease my supply. Legal factors, again, against supplier. So whatever the scenario is, you need to think about, is it in favor of suppliers or against suppliers? Productivity decreases. Perhaps it takes me longer now to grow these berries because there's a lot more in the process. So that's going to decrease my supply, or maybe I hurt my hand and I can't work as quickly. Price of related good increases. So back to our strawberries and berries example. Let's say the strawberry price went up. So I'm going to sell more strawberries now because I'm making more profits from that good. So my supply for berries is going to decrease. If there's more health and safety costs, my supply would decrease. And if there's more compliance costs, my supply would also decrease. So just remember that these are factors other than price. So we're not thinking about our P1 to P2 price change anymore. All we're doing is going to shift the curve, either left or right. And it is a change in supply, not quantity supplied. So just make sure we get those wordings correct. So subsidies, if the government, so this would fall under an external factor and under political. So if the government pays a firm, and a firm is just the same as a company, a subsidy to ensure lower costs of production, this would mean lower prices for the consumer. So that's going to increase their supply, because it's going to decrease the cost for the producer. So a subsidy from the government will cause a shift of supply to the right, which is an increase. A sales tax. So if the government places a tax to discourage consumption, so we could think of perhaps like tobacco has been taxed quite a bit. That's because the government are trying to discourage people consuming it. That's going to decrease a firm's revenue. So revenue is the money coming in, therefore decrease the production. So that will cause a shift to the left as a decrease of supply. And just remember here, see on the x-axis we've got QS, not QSD, where we use quantity demanded. Environmental factors. So if there's plenty of sunshine and moderate rainfall, wine growers will be able to produce more. So environmental was in favour, that's going to increase the supply. So the supply curve will shift to the right. And as we see, we do S1 to S2, and again do your arrow, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to worry about anything else, the numbers, the price, the quantity figures. We're literally just showing a shift. If, for example, there was a storm that destroyed all the vineyards, and then supply would decrease. So our curve would shift to the left. Costs of production. These are just different examples. So if the rent for the factory decreased from $3,500 to $2,000 per month, okay, so that's a cost of production going down. What do you think would do, what that would do to supply? Is supply going to increase or decrease? If transportation costs increased due to petrol prices increasing, overall, will supply increase or decrease? If wages increase after workers complain to unions, will supply increase or decrease? If the cost of raw materials increase, will overall supply increase or decrease? And if the cost of electricity increases for the company, will that increase supply or decrease supply? So this is what you'll need to think about. You'll get a situation, you have to think about how is it going to impact the producer. So if we look at technology now, if there was a new technology and allows the firm to produce things quicker or more effectively or efficiently, that's going to increase supply. If the company had an old technology and it went out of stock, so if you think of like typewriters, and they only use typewriters, that's going to decrease supply. So technology could be both, depending on what it does. Productivity of workers. If a worker increases their productivity, once they get training, they get upskilling. This has been happening a lot now with our recent lockdown. People are learning new skills so that they can increase their productivity. So this would increase their supply. If there was a negative employee attitude and that decreased their productivity, that would decrease supply. If we look at changes in laws relating to companies, if there was a new environmental law that increased the cost of producing goods, that's going to decrease supply. If there was changes to legislation allowing for GE modification and a decrease in cost of production, that would increase supply. So again, look at your scenario. It could be positive, it could be negative, and that could increase or decrease. So if a firm supplies basketballs, they could also produce and supply soccer balls or netballs. So we call these related goods. This is a really important concept that you need to learn. And related goods help a company reach a different market using the same resources. So to make a basketball would be the same resources to make a netball or a soccer ball. So if the price of netballs increased, a firm will switch from making basketballs and make more netballs. Because now, as we learnt, if the price goes up, the quantity goes up because it is more profitable to the company. So the company will want to make more netballs than basketballs because they're making more profit. And then vice versa. If the price of netballs decreased, the firm will want to make even more basketballs so that they make more profit. Okay, so the graphs are showing both of those scenarios. The supply of basketballs will decrease in that first graph because the related good has gone up, so netball price has gone up. And in that second graph, the supply of netballs has increased because the company are going to make more profits based on the price of netballs increasing. So you might get a scenario like this where you have to draw two graphs side by side and look at how they compare and contrast each other. And just to summarize, there'll be implications that occur based on those changes that you make. So a shift to the right, which is an increase, you'll need to hire more staff, you might need more machinery, you might need to purchase more resources, you might need to increase your factory or your shop store or whatever you work in. If there is a decrease in supply, you might need to lay off staff. And again, this has happened really recently. You'll need to look at ways to reduce costs. You'll need to look for alternative goods or services to produce, and you might even need to close down. So you would have seen a lot of these things happening in our economy at this point in time. So it's really important to start reading the news and see which one of these applies. But yeah, thank you. And if you've got any questions, just give me a call or an email and we'll discuss it a bit further. But if you could please now refer to your task checklist and work on your non-price factors, which is box 3, box 4, start creating some flashcards and doing those practice questions.